Have you ever heard of a man who wanted nothing less than the world itself? A man who, before the age of 30, had already set foot in more lands than most kings could ever dream of. Imagine a young warrior, standing with his sword raised high, staring at the horizon, and saying to himself, "The world is not enough." This is the story of Sikandar-e-Azam, known to the world as Alexander the Great, the king who changed the map of history, but who could not conquer the one enemy that no man has ever defeated: death. He was born in 356 BC, in the ancient city of Pella, in Macedonia. His father was King Philip II, a man who had transformed Macedonia from a weak and fragmented land into a powerful kingdom. His mother was Olympias, a strong and ambitious woman who filled her son's mind with a belief that he was no ordinary child. From the very beginning, Alexander's destiny was shaped by two forces: his father's dreams of conquest, and his mother's whispers that he carried the blood of gods. As a boy, Alexander was restless, curious, and fearless. While other children played with toys, he was fascinated by stories of warriors, battles, and heroes. His mother often told him that he was descended from Achilles, the legendary hero of the Trojan War. These stories lit a fire inside him. He began to believe he was born to do something greater than any man before him. When Alexander was a teenager, his father hired the greatest teacher of that time to educate him, Aristotle. Yes, the same Aristotle whose ideas shaped philosophy, science, and logic for centuries. Imagine being taught as a child not only about war and politics, but also about philosophy, medicine, geography, and literature. Aristotle gave Alexander knowledge of the world, but also a sense of destiny, that a ruler's purpose was to bring order and greatness wherever he went. But Alexander was not only a thinker, he was a fighter. One of the most famous stories from his youth was about the wild horse Bucephalus. No one could tame the horse. It would throw off every rider who dared to sit on it. Alexander, just a boy of 12, noticed something others didn't: the horse was afraid of its own shadow. So, he turned its face toward the sun and gently calmed it. Then, with confidence, he mounted Bucephalus and rode him as if they were one. Everyone was stunned. King Philip, his father, is said to have told him that day, "My son, seek a kingdom big enough for your ambitions. Macedonia is too small for you." From that moment, it was clear: Alexander was destined for greatness. But greatness often comes with sacrifice. Alexander's relationship with his father was complicated. Philip was a powerful king, but Alexander often felt overshadowed by him. He longed to prove himself not only as a prince, but as a leader in his own right. When Philip was assassinated in 336 BC, Alexander was just 20 years old. Suddenly, the crown was on his head. Many thought he was too young, too inexperienced. But Alexander silenced his enemies quickly. He crushed revolts, united the Greek city-states, and declared that his father's dream, to invade Persia, the greatest empire of the time, would now become his mission. And so began one of the most extraordinary journeys in human history. At the head of a disciplined but small army, Alexander crossed into Asia. Facing him was the Persian Empire, ruled by King Darius III, a man with far greater resources and soldiers. But Alexander had something the Persians did not: vision, speed, and the loyalty of men who believed he was invincible. The first great test came at the Battle of Granicus. Against overwhelming odds, Alexander led his cavalry straight into the river, charging at the Persian army with fearless determination. His boldness shocked his enemies. Victory was his. The young Macedonian king had struck his first blow against the mighty Persians. But this was only the beginning. At the Battle of Issus, Alexander faced Darius himself. The Persian king brought an army said to be 5 times larger than Alexander's. Any other commander might have retreated. But Alexander understood something that would define his entire life: battles are not won by numbers, but by strategy and courage. With his men, he attacked the Persian flank, pushing straight toward Darius. The sight of Alexander charging directly at him terrified the Persian king. Darius fled the battlefield, abandoning his army, his family, and his pride. Imagine the scene: a young conqueror, standing victorious over the greatest king of the known world. The wife, mother, and daughters of Darius were taken captive, but Alexander treated them with respect and dignity. This showed not only his strength as a warrior, but also his character as a leader. He wanted the world to see that he was not merely a destroyer, but a ruler worthy of loyalty. With every victory, Alexander's legend grew. He marched into Egypt, where people welcomed him as a liberator. In the desert, he visited the oracle of Ammon, where priests declared him a son of the gods. For Alexander, this was not just superstition, it was destiny confirmed. He began to believe more strongly that he was chosen to rule the world. But perhaps the most decisive moment came at the Battle of Gaugamela in 331 BC. Here, Darius gathered a massive army, determined to crush Alexander once and for all. The Persians even had war elephants and scythed chariots, terrifying weapons designed to rip through men and horses alike. Yet Alexander remained calm. He positioned his troops cleverly, creating openings in the Persian lines. Then, with precision, he led a direct charge toward Darius once again. The sight was too much for the Persian king. Just like before, Darius fled. His empire crumbled. By the age of 25, Alexander had defeated the greatest empire in the world. He now ruled lands stretching from Greece to Egypt, from the Mediterranean to Persia. Most men would have stopped there, satisfied with unimaginable power. But Alexander was not like most men. His heart burned for more. He wanted to go further, to the edges of the known world. He marched into Central Asia, through deserts and mountains, facing rebellions and ambushes. Yet, every challenge only strengthened his legend. His army followed him with fierce loyalty, though many wondered if their king would ever stop. To Alexander, stopping was death. Moving forward was life. In these years, Alexander's personality began to change. Once a noble and charismatic leader, he started to believe more and more in his own divinity. He demanded people bow to him as they would to a god. He killed those who opposed him, sometimes even his closest companions. Ambition can make a man great, but it can also consume him. Still, his vision remained unmatched. He dreamed of uniting East and West, of blending cultures, of creating one great empire where Greeks, Persians, and others would live together. He encouraged his soldiers to marry local women, and he himself married Roxana, a princess from Bactria. In his mind, this was not just conquest, it was the birth of a new world. But his men grew weary. They had marched thousands of miles, fought countless battles, and crossed lands no Greek had ever seen. When Alexander pushed toward India, his army finally reached its breaking point. In 326 BC, at the Battle of the Hydaspes, he faced King Porus, a brave ruler who fought with elephants. The battle was fierce and bloody, but Alexander, as always, emerged victorious. He admired Porus so much that instead of dethroning him, he restored him as king, saying, "You shall rule as one king to another." Yet after this victory, his army refused to go further. They stood on the banks of the river, exhausted, longing for home. For the first time, Alexander had to turn back. Even a king who conquered the world could not conquer the hearts of tired men. By now, he was still only in his early 30s, but his body was worn, his mind restless. He returned to Babylon, the heart of his empire, where he began planning new conquests, perhaps even Arabia and beyond. But destiny had other plans. It was in Babylon that his health suddenly began to fail. Some say it was fever, perhaps malaria or typhoid. Others whisper it was poison, given by those who feared his power. For days, Alexander lay weak, unable to move or speak. His soldiers, loyal to the end, filed past his bed to see their king one last time. When asked to whom he would leave his empire, he is said to have whispered, "To the strongest." With those words, he breathed his last. He was only 32 years old. The man who had set out to conquer the world had conquered more than anyone before him. Yet, in the end, he could not conquer time. This is only the beginning of his story, the rise of a boy who became a legend, a king who became a myth. But the question remains, what did his death mean for the empire he left behind? And how did the world remember him, the man who won everything, but lost the chance to grow old? The death of Alexander the Great shocked the world. A man who had seemed invincible, a king whose name struck fear and admiration in the hearts of kings and commoners alike, was gone, at the age of 32. His empire stretched across thousands of miles, from the Aegean Sea to the Indus River, but now there was no leader strong enough to hold it together. Babylon, the jewel of his empire, became a city of mourning. Soldiers wept openly. Citizens wondered how a man so full of life, so vibrant, so unstoppable, could vanish so suddenly. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some whispered that he had been poisoned, a victim of political betrayal. Others said it was fever, a punishment from the gods for daring to call himself divine. But no one truly knew. The death of Alexander was shrouded in mystery, a fitting end for a man whose life had already seemed almost mythical. His generals, known as the Diadochi, faced a challenge that would define history: who would inherit this vast empire? Alexander had left no clear heir. His son, Alexander IV, was just a baby, born after his death. His wife Roxana and the child became pawns in a game of power and ambition. One by one, Alexander's trusted commanders turned on each other. Ptolemy, Seleucus, Antigonus, and Lysimachus carved the empire into pieces, each claiming a kingdom. Macedonia, Egypt, Persia, and the lands of Central Asia became separate realms under separate rulers. It is said that Alexander's dream of a united world, a blending of East and West, crumbled in the very moment of his death. The ideal of one empire, one vision, one destiny, was replaced by ambition, betrayal, and war. Yet even in division, the legacy of Alexander remained alive. The cities he founded, the roads he built, the spread of Greek culture, art, and knowledge, they endured. Alexandria in Egypt, for example, became a beacon of learning, trade, and science for centuries. His name lived on long after his body was gone. Alexander's influence extended far beyond borders. In every battle, every conquest, he carried a vision not just of power, but of uniting people. He encouraged marriages between his soldiers and local women. He adopted customs and traditions of the lands he conquered. He wanted a world where Greeks, Persians, Egyptians, and Indians could coexist under a shared banner of civilization. And in some ways, he succeeded. The cultural exchange sparked by his campaigns reshaped the ancient world forever. But there were also darker sides to his legacy. Alexander was a man of extremes. His ambition, his drive to be remembered forever, often led to cruelty. Cities that resisted him were destroyed. Leaders who opposed him were executed, sometimes brutally. Friends and allies were not always safe. He demanded absolute loyalty, and any hint of dissent could be fatal. Historians still debate whether Alexander was a visionary or a tyrant, a liberator or a conqueror who brought death along with progress. Even in his personal life, tragedy followed him. Roxana, his beloved wife, and their son faced danger after his death. Alexander IV was eventually murdered as a child, a victim of the same ambition and cruelty that had marked his father's world. Alexander himself had never lived long enough to see the fruits of his conquests or enjoy a life beyond war. His body, preserved in a golden sarcophagus, became a symbol of both glory and loss. Yet the fascination with Alexander the Great did not fade. Poets, historians, and philosophers told his story for centuries. They marveled at his audacity, his brilliance, his courage. Some called him the greatest military genius in history. Others studied his life to understand the human desire for immortality through legacy. For Alexander, it was never enough to conquer lands. He sought to conquer time itself, to make the world remember him forever. And, in a way, he succeeded. Legends grew around him. Some said his body did not decompose for days, a miracle attributed to his divine ancestry. Others told tales of dreams in which he appeared, guiding generals, inspiring kings, and shaping the future. His life became the standard against which later conquerors measured themselves. Julius Caesar, Napoleon, and even modern generals studied his strategies and campaigns. The stories of battles, the clever tactics, the daring maneuvers, they became timeless lessons in courage, intelligence, and audacity. But beyond the battles and conquests, Alexander's life also carries a warning. It is the story of how ambition can drive a man to extraordinary heights, yet leave him vulnerable to forces he cannot control. He conquered empires, but he could not conquer his own mortality. He inspired loyalty, but he could not prevent the fragmentation of all he built. And perhaps most haunting of all, he died at an age when most men are just beginning to understand their place in the world, leaving behind questions that still captivate us today. What would Alexander have done if he had lived to old age? Would he have continued to expand, or would he have sought peace, governance, and wisdom? We will never know. History only allows us to glimpse his extraordinary journey: a young boy who tamed a wild horse, a man who led armies into battle, a king who became a legend. And yet, his story is not just about power. It is about the human desire to be remembered. Alexander's life reminds us that greatness is measured not just in victories, but in the impact one leaves behind. He changed the world in ways no one else could, yet he could not change the one truth that awaits all of us: life is fragile, fleeting, and precious. As we look back on Alexander's journey, from the streets of Pella to the deserts of Persia, from the banks of the Indus River to the heart of Babylon, we see a life lived with passion, courage, and relentless ambition. He was a man who touched the sun and reached for immortality, only to be reminded that even the greatest cannot escape the bounds of time. Answer: the story of Sikandar-e-Azam, Alexander the Great, ends not with the sound of victory, but with a whisper of legacy. He conquered the world, yet he could not conquer death. He sought to unite lands and peoples, yet his empire fell apart within years. He became a legend, yet the man himself was mortal. Perhaps that is the ultimate lesson of his life. Greatness is not eternal, but the impact of greatness echoes through history. The roads he built, the cities he founded, the cultures he bridged, they remain, centuries later, as reminders of what one determined individual can achieve. Alexander may have died at 32, but his story lives on. In every soldier who dreams of glory, in every leader who studies strategy, in every historian who marvels at ambition, the spirit of Alexander the Great endures. His life challenges us to ask, how will we leave our mark on the world? What will survive after we are gone? And, most haunting of all, can any man truly conquer the world if he cannot even conquer himself? The tale of Sikandar-e-Azam is not just history, it is a reflection on human ambition, mortality, and the eternal desire to be remembered. And though his body rests in Babylon, his spirit continues to inspire generations, to dream bigger, to strive further, and to remember that the world, in all its vastness, can be shaped by those bold enough to claim it. This is the story of a boy who became a legend, a king who conquered nations, and a man who challenged the very limits of life itself. Alexander the Great, the name that still echoes, centuries later, across the lands he once ruled, reminding us that even in death, some lives are too extraordinary to be forgotten.